Yeah, Klaus Mege, Food with Thought. This is episode 2 on Megatrends in food. Here I wanted to talk specifically about industrial agriculture and how this food system has evolved since post-World War II. Industrial agriculture, in a nutshell, is causing the loss of topsoil. It destroys the microbiota in the soil. Soil is an ecosystem. There's more life diversity inside the soil than there is on top of the soil. The soil also contains 2 to 3 times as much carbon as there is in the atmosphere. It's an amazingly important part of the entire ecosphere. President Roosevelt, just to bring this into context, President Roosevelt, who had his experience out of the Dust Bowl, Industrial Revolution, coming out of this insanity that was done in the 1920s and 30s in not respecting agricultural know-how that has evolved over thousands of years, came to state that a nation that destroys its topsoil destroys itself. So how is this happening? With the invention of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, to learn how to extract nitrogen from natural gas, basically, by spraying that onto the fields or adding this to the crops, the crop is just mushrooming. The effect is stunning. So the production volumes, the yields per acre, just doubled, quadrupled, and really facilitated this population explosion that I was mentioning in the previous video. But at the same time, it disrupts the process of photosynthesis, and the photosynthetic plants absorbing sunlight change sunlight into nutrients through their root system that go into the soil. So you have basically sunlight transferred into forms of nutrients like nitrogen that go into the soil and feed soil organic matter. That soil organic matter in turn nourishes insects, it nourishes worms. There's an enormous diversity of life inside that soil, which then nourishes birds, nourishes small mammals, so it goes up the food chain. The global use of synthetic nitrogen, just to put this into perspective, last year was approximately 100 million tons. I mean, it's just unfathomable volume of nitrogen that's being thrown out into the environment, and it completely disrupts the natural life cycle. That fertilizer also doesn't bind with the soil. It stays on top. The plant nourishes itself from that. It doesn't grow a root system, very shallow roots, meaning the soil doesn't get nourished. But when it rains, that nitrogen is running off into the waterways, it's running into the rivers, it's running into the open seas. That is causing these enormous algae blooms that you see along the Gulf of Mexico, along the coast of Florida, but all across the United States, really, Maine, I mean, everywhere. So in the lakes, you have these enormous algae blooms that are directly caused by fertilizer runoff from agricultural fields. It's destroying seafood life because it causes a growth of algae, which takes out all the oxygen from the water, which suffocates the aquatic life. This is so bad that you can watch from space. There are satellite images from these runoffs from the Mississippi River Delta and from the Amazon River that stretch hundreds of miles into the open sea. It's an enormous disruption of the natural systems. So other fertilizers that are being added because the soil now is dead. There's nothing in there that provides these minerals and nutrients that we need to live. I mean, our brain needs certain minerals and so on. So there's phosphate, there's potassium, there's potash, which is being added into the fertilizer package, so to speak, and overall, you have these mined minerals then added to these fields, but the outcome you can taste it is nothing like the product coming from a natural soil. It's still nutrient depleted, nutrient deprived. Um, the but what this fertilizer has allowed is monocrop practices. So you have these enormous fields, 1,000 acres, 2,000, 5,000 acre fields of potatoes and wheat and corn and soy. Um, I mean, even when you go to Southern California, you see strawberry fields that are hundreds of acres large. Um, so these monocrops then live in this deprived, depleted soil. They now become vulnerable to predation, to weeds and to insects that prey on them and destroy them. So now we need to use toxins, we need to do pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides to protect these plants. So this has been turning into an ever intensifying cycle because nature, being what it is, insects are getting tougher and tougher, so the poisons have to be more toxic and more toxic. The same is true for weeds. So the herbicides are getting ever more toxic to keep up this race, and you can't win that race against nature, essentially. So what came about is that in 2018 we used 120 million tons of glyphosate, spraying it into the feeds, which is a weed killer. It's Roundup, and that in turn now bleeds into the food supply. So today there are traces of glyphosate that you can find in mother's milk. You can find it in American mother's breast milk. About 20% of women have glyphosate in their breast milk. You find it in urine samples. And the industry claims that there's nothing to worry about. This is completely harmless. Other people are saying many of the pathologies that have occurred, cancers, all kinds of mental deficiencies and so on, are leading back to these toxins that we're putting into our bodies. The other thing is concentrated animal feeding operations. Animals are an integral part of agriculture. The manure from animals has been used for thousands of years to bring biomass back, into the soil and feed the soil organic matter. In Germany, for example, they gather the manure all year long into a big pile, and then in the fall they spread it out into the fields. And you can literally put your hand into the soil. It's warm because the soil, the bacteria is just bubbling in there. So the way we raise animals is put out food in genetically modified crops that are resistant to very toxic herbicides and pesticides, then feed that to the animals, and we give the animals antibiotics prophylactically to keep them healthy because they don't do well in such confined environments, and then we give them growth hormones in order to have them grow up faster, and all of that is bleeding into, first of all, the human food supply, and then secondly, it is catastrophic in the environment because a pig, for example, produces roughly 3 to 5 times as much manure as a human. So now you have a pig concentrated feeding operations with 30,000 animals in there. They're producing the manure of a city. I mean, Bend has 100,000 people. This is like disposing all of this manure into the open environment without any treatment. So many states have, Iowa, 2 million pigs in there. So you have these enormous feeding operations there, where the manure from animals, rather than being a fertilizer, to restore the soil and be integrated into the agricultural operation, now becomes a toxin that pollutes our water supply and pollutes the environment. So to change that, it's obvious. We have to change that. Um, not even to talk about the depletion of carbon that comes from the soil, where this carbon is steaming out of the soil by leaving it, by breaking it open. So I will talk about that in the next video some more. If you are interested to follow this conversation, please hit the subscription button, make comments. Love to hear what you have to say. You can go on my Facebook page, Growing a Revolution, to see what conversations are taking place there. Thank you.